Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of the tragedy that shook the small town of Westwood High. A tale of secrecy, simmering anger, and a deadly plan. This case will leave you wondering, how could someone who seemed just like any other student harbor such a destructive rage? And what was the tipping point that led to a day no one will ever forget? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of Westwood High's deadly shooting. Lucas Matthews was a quiet, invisible high school senior, his life defined by rejection and loneliness. But everything changed the night of the senior prom, when he decided that silence was no longer an option. Ethan Harper, the popular athlete, had everything Lucas wanted: love, attention, a perfect life with Emily Davis, the girl Lucas had silently obsessed over for months. As the night unfolded, Lucas's obsession turned into a dangerous plan for revenge. What happens when someone pushed to the edge finally decides to strike back? The clock was ticking, and Lucas was ready to make them all notice him, no matter the cost. The town of Westwood had always been peaceful. Nestled among rolling hills and quiet streets, it was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other by name, and the sounds of children playing could be heard well into the evening. Westwood High, the local school, was no different, a place where students were often seen as part of a larger family. But even in a small town like this, dark secrets can remain hidden, buried beneath the surface of everyday life. Lucas Matthews was a 17-year-old student at Westwood High, a name that few would recognize unless they knew him well. He was the quiet type, the one who sat in the back of the classroom, never drawing attention to himself. He didn't have a group of friends to eat lunch with or anyone to sit beside in the cafeteria. Most students barely acknowledged his presence, and teachers assumed he was shy or simply uninterested in school, often marked him as a loner, but no one suspected anything more. But Lucas's silence hid something far more disturbing. Behind Lucas's silent exterior was a deep well of frustration. He felt invisible at school, ignored by his peers and dismissed by the adults who should have been guiding him. His life outside school was equally isolated. At home, Lucas was a ghost, slipping through the days unnoticed by his parents. His father was distant, wrapped up in his own work, while his mother was often preoccupied with her own problems. Lucas found solace in his solitary existence, spending long hours in his room, his mind constantly churning with dark thoughts. His escape was the internet, where he could indulge his fantasies without judgment. There, he stumbled upon forums and videos that discussed past tragedies, school shootings, and other violent events. The more he learned, the more he fixated on them, studying the motives behind each act, becoming obsessed with the idea of making a name for himself in a way that would never be forgotten. But it wasn't just the darkness of the world that consumed Lucas, it was Emily, the girl he had been obsessed with for years. Emily was everything Lucas was not. She was popular, outgoing, and effortlessly beautiful. She had a circle of friends who adored her, and she excelled at everything she did. Every day, Lucas watched from the sidelines as Emily's life unfolded in a way that seemed so perfect, so unattainable. But it wasn't just her beauty or popularity that drew him in, it was the way she seemed to float above it all, untouched by the pressures that weighed down on others. He had tried, unsuccessfully, to get closer to her in subtle ways. He would pass her in the hallways, watch her from a distance, but she barely acknowledged his existence. She never noticed him, and that was the part that gnawed at him the most. It wasn't just the fact that she was everything he wasn't, it was the fact that she seemed to have everything, and he had nothing. Lucas believed that if he could only make her see him, if she could just notice his existence, everything would be different. As time went on, his obsession with Emily deepened. He began to imagine scenarios in which he was the hero, the one who could save her from some kind of danger. But in these fantasies, the lines between hero and villain blurred. What began as a simple desire for attention transformed into something darker. He began to feel a sense of entitlement to her, as if she owed him something for all the pain and rejection he had endured. And then there was Ethan. Ethan Ford was everything Lucas hated: handsome, popular, and athletic. Ethan was Emily's boyfriend, and Lucas's hatred for him grew as their relationship blossomed. Ethan had what Lucas could only dream of: Emily's attention, her affection, and her love. With every glance exchanged between them, Lucas felt a surge of jealousy that consumed him. It was more than just envy, it was the fire that fueled his rage, the reason he began to plot his revenge. Lucas's thoughts became consumed with Emily and Ethan, and with every passing day he grew more distant from reality. His fantasies about revenge spiraled, mixing with a deep resentment for everyone who had ever made him feel small and invisible. He no longer saw himself as a quiet, unnoticed student. He imagined himself as someone capable of unimaginable acts, someone who could make the world sit up and take notice. But his plan was still a secret, hidden deep inside, waiting for the right moment to come to life. No one at Westwood High suspected the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. No one could have imagined that the quiet boy who sat in the back of the class, the one who never raised his hand or spoke out of turn, could be capable of the kind of violence that was about to unfold. Lucas's descent into darkness wasn't sudden. Over the months leading up to the tragic event, he began to change. The subtle shifts in his behavior were unnoticed by those around him, masked by his quiet, reserved nature. But something inside him was shifting, brewing under the surface. His isolation, once a comfort, began to feel like a cage. He was no longer content to simply watch from the sidelines. His feelings of anger and frustration began to fester, growing into something darker, more dangerous. Lucas had always been an intelligent student, but his grades started to drop. He stopped paying attention in class, no longer interested in anything other than the world he was constructing in his mind. At night, he would disappear into his room, staring at the glowing screen of his computer as he scoured the internet for more information about violent acts, school shootings, bombings, and other tragedies that had made headlines. The more he researched, the more obsessed he became. He studied the perpetrators, trying to understand what made them tick, trying to find the logic behind their chaos. It was as though he was preparing himself for something, but what that something was, even Lucas couldn't fully comprehend. But there was one thing he was certain about: his resentment for Emily, for Ethan, for the world that had ignored him, was growing by the day. It wasn't just jealousy that consumed him, it was the idea that he could make them all see him, not as the invisible boy at the back of the class, but as someone powerful, someone capable of control. And in his mind, the only way to do that was through violence. Lucas spent hours poring over blueprints of past school shootings, studying the details, the weapons used, the timing, the places where the attackers had made their stand. He took notes, made plans, and thought through every possible scenario. In his mind, there was no room for failure. His revenge was something he had to get right. If he was going to make them notice him, it had to be perfect. The more time passed, the more his anger consumed him. Lucas stopped attending social events, avoiding any interaction with his classmates. He began to see everyone around him as nothing more than obstacles in his way, people who had made him feel small and insignificant. Teachers began to take notice of his strange behavior, but instead of reaching out, they simply marked him as another troubled student, a label that didn't seem to warrant further attention. No one saw the danger in his cold eyes, the intensity in his focus. No one could see how his thoughts had become consumed by an all-consuming desire for vengeance. Emily, for her part, remained blissfully unaware. To her, Lucas was just another face in the crowd, someone she rarely noticed and certainly never paid attention to. She was busy with her friends, with her life, with her boyfriend Ethan. Ethan was everything Lucas hated. The popular athlete with a charming smile and an easy confidence, Ethan was the polar opposite of Lucas. Where Lucas had been ignored, Ethan was adored. Where Lucas had been rejected, Ethan was embraced. And now, Emily Lucas's obsession was dating Ethan. As their relationship blossomed, Lucas's hatred deepened. The jealousy he felt was all-consuming, a fire that he could no longer extinguish. Every glance, every laugh between them, fueled the rage inside him. He couldn't escape it. It was no longer just about Emily, it was about Ethan too. It was about the world that had turned its back on him, the world that had given everything to others while leaving him behind. And Lucas was beginning to believe that he deserved the life Emily had. He wanted to take it all from her to show her that he, too, was capable of greatness. But in Lucas's twisted mind, greatness was defined by violence. He thought of himself not as the invisible boy who watched from the shadows, but as someone who would leave a mark on the world. And that mark, he decided, would come through destruction. He started hoarding weapons, careful to hide them from his family and anyone who might have noticed. His anger simmered, and his thoughts became more focused on revenge. Each passing day, his plan became clearer. It was no longer a matter of just fantasizing about revenge, it was about action. And Lucas was ready to make the world pay attention to him, no matter the cost. The countdown had already begun, and the final act was drawing near. Lucas's anger wasn't just aimed at Emily and Ethan. It was aimed at everyone who had ever made him feel small. He began to make plans, carefully orchestrating every detail of his revenge. He wanted to make sure that everyone at Westwood High would finally notice him and fear him. The days before the attack, Lucas seemed almost normal. He attended classes, sat quietly at lunch, and continued his obsession with Emily from a distance. But beneath the surface, the clock was ticking. He had chosen the day of the senior prom as the day he would carry out his plan. It was a night of celebration, joy, and memories for the graduating class, but for Lucas, it would be the perfect time to disrupt everything. As students prepared for the event, Lucas prepared for chaos. His arsenal was complete, his targets were set, and the moment of his revenge was drawing near. As the days drew closer to the senior prom, Lucas's obsession grew sharper. He became a stranger to those around him, a shadow passing through the halls of Westwood High. His classmates had long since stopped paying attention to him. They had no reason to believe he was capable of such violence. Emily's friends couldn't fathom that the quiet boy they barely knew was harboring a murderous grudge against them. And the teachers simply assumed he was yet another troubled student, one of many who seemed lost in the shuffle of adolescence. But inside, Lucas's thoughts had become consumed by a singular, obsessive goal: revenge. The final weeks before prom felt like a blur to him, an endless countdown to the moment he had been planning for months. While everyone else was caught up in the excitement of the upcoming event, Lucas remained detached, watching the world through a lens of bitterness and resentment. He saw his classmates as nothing more than obstacles, people who had ignored him or made him feel invisible. He couldn't wait for the night when everything would change, when the power he craved would finally be his. Lucas spent countless hours preparing for the night that would give him the control he so desperately wanted. He had already secured the weapons carefully hidden in the closet of his room, locked away from prying eyes. Guns, ammunition, and a knife were all ready for the moment he would strike. The more he thought about it, the more everything began to make sense. This was the only way to make them notice him, to force them to understand what he had been going through all these years. He didn't need their approval. He needed to make them fear him. The idea of standing in the spotlight, the center of attention for once, filled him with a sense of purpose. He carefully mapped out the layout of the school. The gymnasium, where the prom would be held, was the perfect place for chaos. The doors, the windows, the hallways, every escape route had been thought of. Lucas had it all planned. He knew the timing would be crucial. Prom would be the perfect distraction, a night when the entire school would be gathered in one place, unaware of the storm brewing just outside. He'd had enough time to prepare. There would be no mistakes. The students were excited about the event, each day passing in a blur of dress fittings, tuxedo rentals, and last-minute plans. Lucas, on the other hand, had no interest in any of it. He could care less about the glitzy gowns or the decorated gym. He only cared about one thing: making his mark. Every glance he caught of Emily and Ethan, hand in hand, only deepened his resolve. Their happiness was a mockery of the life he had been forced to endure. To him, they were the symbol of everything he had never had, and he couldn't bear to watch it any longer. The night of prom arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Lucas had kept his distance all day, staying away from the school and out of sight. He knew that if anyone noticed his cold, detached demeanor, it would raise questions. So he stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment. As the clock ticked toward midnight, his heart began to race. He could feel the excitement in the air, the vibrations of the music that spilled from the gym, but he wasn't drawn to the celebration. He was drawn to the chaos he was about to unleash. The plan had been set in motion. As the students laughed and danced, oblivious to the horror just around the corner, Lucas slipped through a back door of the school, entering unseen, unnoticed. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, but the sound was drowned by the music. He was ready. The world he had fantasized about for months was about to become his reality. Lucas wasn't nervous. There was no room for fear in his mind, only purpose. With every step, the anger that had built inside him for so long intensified, a burning fuel that pushed him forward. As he approached the gym, where the laughter and cheers filled the air, his grip on the weapon tightened. It was time. He was ready to make them see him, to make them understand the pain he had carried all these years. And then, just as he prepared to step into the gym, something happened. A flicker of doubt, a brief hesitation, ran through his mind. Could he really go through with it? Could he truly destroy everything, even if it meant sacrificing his own future? For a moment, Lucas stood frozen in the shadows, torn between the revenge he had been planning for so long and the reality of what he was about to do. The gymnasium was alive with energy as the night of the senior prom unfolded. The walls were adorned with glittering decorations, and the lights cast a soft, warm glow over the sea of students who swirled across the dance floor. Laughter filled the air, blending with the rhythm of the music, creating an atmosphere of celebration and joy. To everyone else, it was the perfect night, the culmination of 4 years of high school memories. But for Lucas Matthews, it was the perfect moment for destruction. Inside the gym, Emily was the center of attention, surrounded by her friends and, of course, Ethan. She glowed in her elegant dress, a vision of beauty and happiness. Her laughter echoed in the midst of the crowd, and Lucas, watching from the shadows, felt a knot of jealousy twist in his chest. Every smile Emily shared with Ethan, every glance exchanged between them, only deepened the rage simmering inside him. Emily and Ethan were dancing, their lives ahead of them, completely unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. He was invisible to her, nothing more than a face in the crowd, while Ethan, the popular athlete, held her attention, her affection. To Lucas, their perfect life felt like a cruel joke, and he couldn't stand it any longer. He had to make them all see him. In the hallway just beyond the gym, Lucas moved quietly, blending into the darkness. He was wearing black dark, inconspicuous, just like the thoughts swirling in his mind. The weight of the weapons hidden beneath his clothes was comforting, like a shield of power that he had built for himself. He had prepared for this moment for months, planned every detail with precision. There would be no turning back. The violence he had fantasized about for so long was about to become real. As he stood there, waiting for the right moment to make his move, a thought flickered through his mind, a brief, fleeting doubt that almost stopped him in his tracks. For a second, he questioned the gravity of what he was about to do. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about erasing everything he had suffered in his life, everything that had made him feel small and invisible. The weight of that realization pressed on him, but it was quickly drowned out by the intensity of his anger. He couldn't turn back now. He couldn't let them get away with it. Not when he had already come so far. His eyes darted back to the gym. The crowd continued to dance, blissfully unaware of the danger creeping closer. The music thumped in the background, muffled by the walls separating him from them. He had to act fast. His breathing was shallow, his hands cold, but his resolve was stronger than ever. This was his chance to leave a mark, to force everyone to recognize him. Lucas slowly made his way down the corridor, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He passed the storage closet where he had hidden the weapons earlier, the ones he had meticulously arranged for this very moment. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before pulling the door open. His fingers grazed the cool metal of the gun. The plan was clear. No hesitation. No mercy. He had already decided his targets: Emily, Ethan, and everyone who had made him feel small, worthless, ignored. They would all pay. His heart raced as he prepared to move, but then something unexpected happened. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each passing second. His eyes widened, and for a brief moment his entire body tensed. Someone was coming. The adrenaline surged through him, and he froze. His mind raced, every instinct screaming for him to stay hidden, to remain unnoticed. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Lucas held his breath, waiting. He could feel the tension building, the silence pressing down on him. Would they find him? Was this the moment everything would fall apart? For a moment, time seemed to stretch on forever, and Lucas feared that his plan might slip through his fingers. But then, the footsteps began again, fading away as quickly as they had come. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The time had come. The door to the gym was just a few steps away, and Lucas knew there was no turning back now. His heart pounded in his chest, every beat a countdown to the chaos he was about to unleash. As he stepped into the gym, the bright lights and swirling music felt distant, almost unreal. It was as if the world around him had slowed to a crawl, every second drawing him closer to his ultimate goal. Lucas stepped into the crowd, his hand gripping the gun tightly, and then, in that instant, everything felt right. The gymnasium was a blur of flashing lights and thumping music as Lucas stepped into the crowded room. The air was thick with excitement, but to him, it felt suffocating, the noise almost deafening. Emily's laughter rang out, echoing in his ears, as she danced with Ethan in the middle of the crowd, oblivious to the storm that was silently approaching. His grip tightened on the cold metal of the gun tucked under his jacket. He could feel his heart racing, the adrenaline surging through his veins. It was now or never. For a moment, Lucas stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, watching as Emily spun around, her face illuminated by the lights. She looked so beautiful, so untouchable, and for a brief second, it almost felt like he could reach out and take everything she had. The power she held, the attention she commanded, it should have been his. Everything he had endured, the years of pain and rejection, all of it seemed so insignificant compared to the perfect life she led. But that was about to change. The world seemed to slow as he moved through the crowd, unnoticed, as if he was just another anonymous face in the sea of students. No one paid him any mind. They were too busy living their lives, too caught up in their own little worlds to even acknowledge the quiet boy who had been pushed to the fringes for so long. He didn't belong here, and that was exactly why he needed to do this. He had to make them see him, even if it meant tearing everything down in the process. He moved toward the back of the gym, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for the perfect moment. The plan was simple: cause chaos, let the confusion and panic take hold, and then make his exit. He had studied this. He knew how this would unfold. But with every passing second, his thoughts began to blur, the clarity of his plan slipping as his emotions took over. His mind was a whirlwind of anger and jealousy, and with each beat of his heart, the impulse to act grew stronger. Then, just as he was about to take a step forward, a voice in the back of his mind screamed at him to stop. He froze. In that split second, something inside him faltered. Was he really prepared to go through with it? Was this the answer to all the years of isolation, of rejection? What would be left of him after this? He thought about Emily again, her innocence, her laughter, and a strange, fleeting doubt crept into his mind. But then he saw Ethan, standing beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist, laughing with friends, completely unaware of the chaos simmering in the shadows. That sight, that image of the life Lucas could never have, ignited a fire inside him once more. The doubt was gone. This was the only way. He couldn't let them live their perfect lives while he remained a ghost in the background. It had to end tonight. The first shot rang out, breaking the music, shattering the illusion of safety. It was sharp, startling, and in that instant, the gymnasium went silent. People froze, unsure of what had just happened, as the sound of the gunshot reverberated through the room. Panic spread like wildfire as students screamed and scrambled for the nearest exit, pushing and shoving in a frantic attempt to escape. Lucas stood at the back of the room, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. His mind was no longer clear, the plan a distant memory as the chaos erupted around him. Lucas, fueled by his rage, moved through the gym, targeting those who had wronged him or ignored him. Emily was among the first to be shot. Ethan, too, was caught in the crossfire. But what came next was even more shocking. As the scene unfolded, something unexpected happened. He didn't feel the power he had imagined. The adrenaline that had surged through him moments before began to fade, replaced by something darker, something he hadn't anticipated: dread. The students were running in every direction, their faces twisted in fear, and in the madness, Lucas felt a strange sense of emptiness. Was this really what he wanted? Was this what he had imagined all along? His vision blurred, his mind spiraling, and as he moved through the chaos, the weight of his actions started to sink in. The gun felt heavy in his hand, and the weight of the world seemed to fall on his shoulders. He could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder, but the chaos around him drowned everything else out. He had made his mark, but now, as the screams and the chaos consumed the gymnasium, Lucas realized that nothing was ever going to be the same again. And then, just as quickly as it had started, a sharp pain in his side caused him to stumble. He looked down, his vision growing dim as blood began to pool beneath him. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, the world around him fading to black. In that moment, Lucas understood there was no victory in this. There would be no sense of redemption, no satisfaction. Just a devastating silence and the painful realization that he had lost everything. The investigation revealed that Lucas had been planning the shooting for months, but what no one knew was the secret twist. Lucas had secretly admired Emily for years, but it wasn't just her popularity that fueled his rage. He believed she was the key to his transformation. He thought if he could be with her, if he could make her see him, he could change everything. His twisted thinking was the final catalyst for the horrific night. And that's the chilling and tragic story of the Westwood High shooting. One man's obsession turned deadly. A town left in shock, and the lives that will never be the same again. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a true crime story that shook the world. If you found this story as disturbing and haunting as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never forget the dark stories that live in the corners of our world.